Hey everybody, Jamie here, and welcome to our Vital Respiration workshop. This is kind of a command performance because we gave a Facebook Live a few weeks ago that sort of got a lot of really positive feedback and a lot of kind of excitement on, hey, tell us more about this whole breathing thing. So I figured we would. And before we jump in any further, I just kind of want to just give a quick shout out for starters. Amazing to see people from all over the world tuning in, different time zones, different cultures and communities. So that's always super inspiring for us here at the Flow Genome Project. But the absolute door prize goes to Gary, tuning in from Wakanda, who was also saying, what is this webinar about again? So like the idea of showing up for a webinar that you don't even know what it's about. Hat tip to you, my man. Don't know you, but love you already. So without further ado, we're going to take about the next 45 minutes and just kind of give a high-level introduction from sort of our take on respiration, both working with a number of kind of top performers in the field, and that's everyone from Stanford neuroscientists studying this and studying folks like Wim Hof to Navy SEALs practicing this and training this, because obviously they spend a chunk of their time on the water or under the water, to our own developments and practices. This is not a training in the sense that normally when people work with us, the relationship is much tighter and closer, and we actually go through practice-based skills. What this is an overview to the big general field. Hopefully you will leave feeling clued in, a little bit more informed, and holding a perspective that is typically the kind of one that we like to hold, which is not buying into any specific train of thought or school about anything, really, and instead kind of having a perspective from up on the balcony. So basically stripping out the mythologies, including commercial sales and hype, keeping the technologies, understanding the neurophysiology and the mechanisms of action, and hopefully leaving us all a little better for it. And then at the end, I'm going to share with you guys a little bit about our upcoming course and then open it to Q&A. And probably that will take us to the balance of the hour, depending on how we do. So let's go ahead and jump in. I am going to go over here and I'm going to share a screen. I'll still be down here at the bottom, but you guys will get to see kind of the bigger picture. And let's just go ahead and jump right in, which is fundamentally road rules, which would be please just turn off distractions. We are investing time and effort into sharing this with you. You're going to get the most out of it if you're not multitasking, et cetera, et cetera. Our commitment is to be salient, relevant, on point, and hopefully engaging, and hopefully your commitment can be to show up and participate fully as well. And even though it is a remote experience, we're all better for it when we all show up fully. The next one is just a little bit about who we are. Just a quick thing in the quick show of hands in the chat, or just kind of acknowledgement. How many of you are already part of Flow Hacker Nation? And how many of you are, this is perhaps one of your first exposures to us. So we'd love to just kind of just go ahead and type that in the chat. And while you guys are doing that, just so we kind of orient to who our audience is today, it'll be great to just share a little bit about who we are, why we're doing what we're doing. So Stephen Kotler and I co-founded the Flow Genome Project a few years ago in order to put peak performance or flow research on a firm science footing, because it had been kind of hijacked by the new age and kind of the self-help movements, and to say, hey, this stuff deserves rigor, deserves analysis, and deserves to be applied and deployed in communities that matter, and also to be able to kind of communicate and share those stories. Stephen wrote a book called The Rise of Superman. He and I followed up last year with a book called Stealing Fire. And fundamentally, we have been telling the story of ecstasis, or non-ordinary states of awareness that take us outside our everyday waking selves, and understanding how they unlock performance, meaning, satisfaction, mending of trauma, boosting of collaboration and creativity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And gathered around this project are some of our kind of idols and mentors, some of the top neuroscientists, some of the top performance psychologists, some of the top special operations commanders and leaders, some of the top athletes in the world. So we are deeply humbled and honored to work with the amazing performers we get to, and in service of all what, you might ask, well, in service of getting this out to the world. And our mission is to have reverse engineered the genome, or kind of the building blocks of these peak performance states, and to share them with everybody by 2020. So that's what we're here to do. We are a good chunk of the way towards meeting that goal. And if you are fired up by this approach and certainly by this extended community as much as we are, then certainly an open invitation to drop in and jam with us. So let's just see. In fact, I'll see how Heard of Flow, introduced by Jason Silva. Fantastic flow experiences, skiing and meditating. Heard of Flow through Rise of Superman and functional neurology. First exposure was through awareness through high performance sport. Jake, already a part of it for a while. Awesome. Joe, right, a follow-up to Stealing Fire. Well, what you guys are actually getting tonight is going to be a core chapter in my follow-up to Stealing Fire, which will be Church 2.0, remixing science and a religion for a world that's lost its mind. So you guys are absolutely getting shit that's hot off the presses. In fact, I just got pinged by my agent this morning because I was just disappeared into the mountains of British Columbia to go heli skiing last week. So I was actually doing a little field research, and my editor was like, where the hell is the book proposal? So you guys are getting it sooner than you're supposed to. But hopefully that's a fun one. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in to what's actually next here. That's us. This is the deal. The big idea for tonight, at least, is the idea that respiration is one of what I would kind of call a what should we call it? I normally call things three-legged stools, but this is 5. So we may call it a 5-pointed star because that would be extra badass. So the 5 points on the star are, and by the way, the star is how to hack ecstasis, like how to basically become a superhuman in a very real way. And that doesn't mean that we get to leap over tall buildings. You get to get ground into the dirt in the life we've chosen. But it does mean you actually get to live it and operate it from a fundamentally different place. So 5 points on the star. Number 1, respiration. Number 2, music. Number 3, movement. Number 4, sexuality. Number 5, substances or sacraments, depending on how pious you're feeling. Those 5, I would humbly submit, and granted there are others and there are fringe cases and there's a bunch of additional things you can do. But if you really want to talk about the big 5, and we're not talking about lions and tigers and bears, we are actually talking about the 5 most potent techniques of ecstasy to unlock and repattern human consciousness and embodiment. And we're going to start tonight with the first one, respiration. Because obviously, if you're going to hack consciousness and culture, it makes good sense to start as close up to evolutionary drivers as we possibly can. And breathing and reproducing, so fundamentally respiration and sexuality are way up the food chain as far as incented behaviors from an evolutionary point of view. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And hopefully that's why you're here, Gary. And we can take it from there. So let's just see what else we have. Oh, here we go. My wonderful animation thing. Vital respiration. We're going to go over both concepts, high level, a little bit of kind of biology, anatomy, physiology, just so you kind of understand what's going on. And then also some practices and applications and implications. But as much as anything else, we'd love to know, love to leave you guys informed and empowered. So one of the subsets of our mission is both teaching cognitive literacy. So I understand how my body and my brain affect my heart and my mind. And also cognitive liberty, which is that I have full consent over who's attempting to rent space in my head or heart. Meaning that there are a lot of everything from marketers to scammers to hucksters to cult leaders that are all trying to find ways to make use of these techniques of ecstasy against our better interests. And it's important for us to have the integrity and the autonomy to choose our path through this terrain. So that's kind of what we would hope you guys would get at the end of this. Then just going to spend literally 2 minutes letting you guys know something awesome that is coming in March the 5th, which is the launch of our brand new course, and have opened it up to Q&A. And my assumption is that there's a range of folks here, both with different skill sets and experience. Some folks who are maybe have already taken flow fundamentals, already taken some of our more advanced online trainings, or even come and train with us at Flow Camp and other opportunities in person. So, and maybe some of you are professionals. Maybe you already work with clients or you coach athletes or something like that. So, or it could just be, this is my first exposure and I just want to solidify the basics. So whatever we can do there, that'll be Q&A and we'll take it from there. So that's our jam for the day. But to start with, just kind of want to say why respiration. So I kind of introduced the basics. There's in wilderness medicine, there's the good old fashioned rule of 3s, which is, you can go for 3 minutes without breathing. You can go for 3 days without drinking. You can go for 3 weeks without eating. So figure out which one's most important. So 3 minutes without breathing, when that's plastic, we can push on that if we'd like to. But fundamentally, that's it. We need oxygen. And in fact, this notion of a yogi, a neuroscientist, a big wave surfer, and a black magician is just to share with you quickly 4 stories from obviously very different domains that all highlight the profound importance, not just of breathing, like duh, if you don't, you die, but breathing as a tool to unlock both performance and potential. So the first one is a yogi, Patanjali, right? Anybody who does yoga is probably familiar with his name. He's arguably the kind of grandfather of modern yoga, which, by the way, is not an uninterrupted multi-thousand-year tradition, despite what your yoga studio might have told you. Patanjali cooked it up and distilled the postures in the late 19th century and propagated and popularized them. That doesn't mean they didn't have roots. It just means that the lineage is way more jumbly than anybody would actually care to admit. But nonetheless, Patanjali was a rad dude, and he said, breath is the umbilical cord to the universe. So I submit to you evidence one, a person deeply involved in breathing techniques, embodiment techniques, mindfulness techniques, and saying that as simple as it gets, that's the deal. That our breath, and more to the point, our awareness of our breathing, is actually what connects us to the bigger kind of wheels of creation. So here's the challenge. This is step one. We'll take a nod to Patanjali here and say, okay, here's the challenge. Can you stay aware of your breathing for this entire webinar? Okay, we will go through a couple of exercises, things like that along the way. But can you just always be aware of how you're breathing and when you're breathing? Okay, so let's enact that first. So while I continue talking, while you do different things, stay aware of your breathing. You can make a case, and Patanjali and others have, that if you can do that, you're pretty much unflappable. And that the spaciousness of your life, your emotional reactivity, your decision-making, your emotional intelligence, your ability to read and perceive others, all those things goes through the roof as long as you're still focused and aware of your breathing. Okay, next one, neuroscientist. This one is Stanislav Grof. He was a psychiatrist and scientist at Johns Hopkins. He led some of the earliest research on LSD back in the early to mid 60s when it was federally sanctioned through NIH. And then when access to that chemical got shut down, he was searching for other ways to continue exploring access to the unconscious, subconscious, semi-conscious, superconscious of humans, and basically kind of came up with, he borrowed and then just rebranded a technique that he called holotropic breathing, which is basically focused hyperventilation, and found, in fact, his book, I think it's called, Adventures of Discovery of the Self, is basically a compendium of all of the subjective accounts, people who have gone through this, and he and his wife have put thousands of people through their breathing workshops, and they have had breakthroughs that, on a kind of subjective reports, were indistinguishable from full strength pharmaceutical grade LSD 25. So you can be like, oh, wow. So on the one hand, Patanjali was saying, hey, this is really important for mindful connection to things. You have Stan Grof audio, audio. Bam, how's that? Is this good? I think I'm back. Am I back? Give me a shout out if I am back. That would be an awesome thing. If so, in the meantime, I am going to load up my presentation, and we're going to keep going. So I'll just finish telling the stories while our magic slide deck continues, which is to say that simple hyperventilation alone is enough to shift our states to powerfully non-ordinary places. Now, we don't like to overhype or oversell that stuff because that always creates little monkey mind seeking shit, but nonetheless, it's there. So you got relaxation and equanimity by Patanjali. You have shoot the moon, visionary regressions, and sort of, just far out stuff. And then let's talk about the big wave surfer. Well, actually, I'll tell you what, I'll do the Black Magician and then we'll do the big wave surfer. So the Black Magician, Aleister Crowley, rhymes with holy, but wasn't. He was one of the most notorious adepts of the Western magical tradition in the 20th century. He was famously, his face was famously put in the back of the Sgt. Pepper's album from the Beatles, among all the others, kind of, in that big ensemble shot. And he was famous and infamous. He was super, what's the word? Switched on. I mean, he was a badass. Like, he went to Oxford. He was a poet. He was a world-class mountaineer. He was a chess grandmaster. He blew through every Western hermetical tradition that was available in Europe at the time and invented much of his own wild-ass stuff, even ended up with, like, crazy-ass downloads from Egyptian gods while climbing one of the Mexican volcanoes, like a mountaineering expedition on mushrooms, and then went to Egypt and, like, far out stuff. And there's a lot of hysterical stories about him, but if you actually, and he was a flawed human being, but the dude had some very strong skill sets in the non-ordinary state realms and was famous for obscuring all his teachings in crazy allegories, parables, etc., etc. And he said, pranayama, which is fundamentally yogic breath awareness, pranayama alone is the answer. So he actually laid out that strongly. And then finally, and in fact, I think if I ever get back to my slides working, golly, man, and therefore really, really hard for somebody on their belly paddling legs to actually get up enough speed to catch it. And Ian and a core crew of his friends figured out how to do that. And it was fundamentally by learning to see little bits of chop, little microwaves on the big wave. And so they realized, oh, if I can drop in just the little wave, then I might be able to get up enough speed, and then I can get up enough speed, and then I can actually ride the big thing. So that was the technical challenge they had to solve. But the other challenge was human and psychological, which was, holy shit, these are monsters that can drown us. And so one of the key unlocking moves for those guys was to realize, and Andy Walsh, no relation, but the head of high performance and one of our board members at Red Bull, basically trained all of their surfers in breath holds. And so that became his awareness, gave him the spaciousness, gave him the confidence, and gave him the margin of error, margin of safety in order to do the impossible. And that impossible is what then made history. And no sooner had he done that, there was basically a new era in surfing. So for reasons that elude me, we have so many cool pictures for you guys. I really do want to get these going. This is baffling. How about I just try sharing my screen? Let's see if I do that. Give me 1 minute, guys, and I will just see if I can kind of do a workaround here. Oh, that looks like it's working. Bam, 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 bam. There you go. We are on point. Okay, so that's the story. Fundamentally, 4 different domains, 4 very switched on peak performers, all acknowledging breathing's important, but you probably didn't need to know that or you wouldn't have been here in the first place. So let's actually do a quick check-in, which is how exposed to various breathing practices that kind of become all the rage in the last couple of years. Let's just, if you can just check out your polls. So where are our polls? They are the third little icon down. And if you check on that, let's just see where we are in relationship to which practices have you come across? Wim Hof, holotropic, pranayama or kriya, HRV training, any of those kind of things. So let's just see who's got what kind of baseline of experience coming into this workshop together. So Wim Hof looks like about 1 in 4 of you guys. Some of you on the pranayama kriya side, multiple options. So some people, half of you already having experience in at least half of these. That's awesome. That's all great to see. That's all great to see. So what we'd love to do here is give you guys tools to basically understand all of those things from kind of an integrated perspective. And so the first is just to kind of back it way the hell up. Because what I have noticed, at least, is that people get down a specific tunnel in breathing and breathing practices. They tend to find them powerful and effective. So there's some degree of novelty, excitement, potentially hype, and then into kind of magical thinking and or rigid thinking, because this is the thing, this is the way. And what we'd love to do is give you guys perspectives above all that so that you guys can be making more effective choices, both who you study with and kind of how deep you go on different stuff, and then also how to optimize them and how to make them even more fun, because you can for sure as hell make them all more fun. And I can humbly say that the practices that we've been exploring are balls out more effective than any of these individual ones. And that's not because there's anything profound about it. It's just because we are mashup artists. That's what we do. And so if you take shit that works and you combine it with other shit that works and you put it all together, you tend to get really fun. So that's the name of the game, and that's what we're going to kind of cover a little bit tonight. So yeah, half of you have already got exposure to several of these things. So with that, let's take a look at the basics. The first thing is just to realize, roughly speaking, atmospheres 80-20, nitrogen to oxygen. And then when we inhale, we metabolize it and we spew out about 5% carbon dioxide and 15% oxygen. So we've metabolized that, and the nitrogen stays pretty much the same. Okay, so that's the first thing. We've got 3 gases we're playing with here. And that by changing the rate, the volume, and the depth of our respiratory patterns, we are shifting the balances of those 3 gases to profound effects, ranging from relaxation to alertness to full-on transcendence. Okay, so that is step 1, just understanding what makes things happen. And this is the breakdown, just as I was describing. Don't get too wrapped around the axle about it. Just know 80-20 is easy to remember, and roughly 4 to 5% is the carbon dioxide that comes out the other side. This completely affects our physiology, completely affects our consciousness, and our brains are oxygen hogs. We need it to stay alive. Now, something that most folks don't get to spend a lot of time on. If you guys leave with nothing else today, I want you to remember nitrogen and the entire nitrogen family of compounds and the vagus nerve. Those are the 2 kind of hidden gems in understanding respiration and understanding the potentially super potent impacts they can have. Now, you guys probably remember way back from your high school chemistry or environmental science books, something about nitrogen fixation. Well, what that really was is that nitrogen is in the atmosphere. We can't do much with it, but what does happen is that it gets pulled in through photosynthesis and other things into plants, into nitrates. We eat the plants and we eat nitrates coming from leafy vegetables and all those kinds of things. We then convert that to nitric oxide, which is a gaseous neurotransmitter. And for anybody that knows the flow cycle, that is the neurotransmitter that takes us out of flight freeze into the relaxation stage of the flow response. It replaces those kind of stressful neurochemicals with the positive, feel-good, learning enhancing neurochemicals that come out of a flow state. Also, nitric oxide is a vasodilator, so it actually opens up our bloodstream and our perfusion, so we get more blood shining around. It's very positive for heart health. It is positive for versus depression. There are so many things that having healthy amounts of nitric oxide in our bodies does to, through, and for us, not the least of which is prompting and triggering a flow state. And Interestingly, you may get to check it out, but that the Karolinska Institute, the folks that are responsible for the Nobel Prizes, they're deep into this research, and they have found that vibrating your nasal cavity is actually while you exhale through your nose. So basically, mouth breathing. It's a pejorative for a reason, right? Oh, those guys are just a bunch of mouth breathers, right? The idea is that by the time you're breathing through your mouth, you're in a stress response. Now, if you're really pegging it as an athlete, you might need to. But ideally, if we can breathe through our nose, it downregulates the two things, right? It increases nitric oxide production and downregulates our vagal nerve, which runs from our brain through our heart and wanders all the way down to our root. And those two things are very powerfully interconnected. And this is one of the strongest basic ways we can shift how we feel and how we perform. So that's it with the amazing nitrogen family. There's one more. We've got N, nitrogen, we've got NO, and then we also have N2O. So NO is nitric oxide, and then we have N2O, which is nitrous oxide. And we can kind of come back to those and discuss those in a minute. So let us, this is, and by the way, the little footnotes here, if you check those out, that is Herbert Benson's work at Harvard. He wrote a very interesting book called The Breakout Principle, which describes exactly this kind of stuff. And oh, by the way, since we're talking about nitric oxide, I'm going to share with you, like, my kids were just busting my balls tonight, actually, because I was doing a couple more tests before coming on, because I wanted to like validate a few things. And they're like, you are such a nerd. But I was like, no, I'm not a nerd. I don't care about any of this stuff. But sometimes, like, you crazy biohackers really are just voracious for this sort of stuff. So I figured I would share with you guys some of the things we're geeking on. So let me hold this up. Let's see how I do this. Human, this is the name. Boom, there you go. These are nitric oxide test strips. And you can put your saliva on them, and they will turn different colors, just like any other kind of pH strip, and they will show you how much nitric oxide you have in your fundamentally saliva and bloodstream. And then, surprise, surprise, they also have these little lozenges, Neo 40s. And you can do this if anybody's followed Tim Ferriss's stuff. You can do this with beet juice, with varying other nitrate-rich compounds. These lozenges, I've been playing with these a little bit over the last few months, and they are interesting. So if you are curious, like, oh, I'd like to play with my respiration, and I'd like to do it in a kind of a little bit of a citizen science-y kind of way, meaning I don't want to just be superstitious and do stuff, and then actually conduct some experiments for myself. This is a way to do it, okay? So these, in fact, what I will do, let's see, oh no, I can't. I was gonna stop the slide presentation to show you guys a little bit more close-ups, but if I do that, I think I might lose the deck. So I'm just gonna stick with this, and you just forgive me on the close-ups. The next thing is to say, get a pulse oximeter. You guys can see this. I will even put it on my finger and turn it on. These cost between 10 and 15 bucks. And you can see it will show it might be all backwards for you guys, but you can see that there will be two numbers that show up there. The top number is my oxygen saturation, and the bottom number is my heart rate. And you can see that little blippy thing that looks like the Knight Rider symbol on the bottom right or left, depending on how you're looking at it. And that is my actual real-time heartbeat. Now, what this allows you to do is, if you've got nitric oxide test strips, you've got a pulse oximeter, and you've got a stopwatch, you can conduct an awful lot of these experiments for yourself, and you can start learning empirically what is actually working for you versus what is just kind of hand-me-down wisdom. Okay, so with that said, let's take a look at the next one. Now, this is kind of what we promised, which was to say, let's get up on the balcony of all the breathing hype, and let's just understand, hey, man, it's human stuff. It's pretty straightforward. There's a handful of options, and we should understand all of them. And we don't want to go deep in one and be ignorant of the other. So there's two slides here. The first three are fundamentally, don't underestimate just slow, relaxed, efficient breathing. Most people end up with 30% of carbon dioxide pooling in the bottom of their lungs. So just poor air exchange, which means their brains are subperforming. 80% of kids diagnosed with learning differences are hypoxic, meaning that they have oxygen saturations of below 94 to 93%. So the whole time those little kids are gunning along, they are just not enough oxygen to the brain because they have poor muscle tone and they don't know how to breathe properly. So do not underestimate just full, efficient, relaxed breathing. It's not sexy. It's not trademarked. There's nothing else about it other than it's good for us. And it can actually be incredibly profound. In fact, Dr. Alan Watkins, there's a book called Cardiac Coherence. He's a doctor in the UK, colleague of ours that works with the British Olympic rowing team and some of the rugby teams and a bunch of kind of FTSE 1000 kind of corporate executives and that sort of world. He's familiar with really complicated breathing patterns as well. And he recommends deep, slow, smooth, steady. You can do a whole bunch else. And you can geek out indefinitely, but deep, slow, smooth, steady still wins the race. So that's a really important one. The next one, hyperventilation. So we alluded to Stan Grof and the evolution of holotropic breathing. Holotropic breathing, honestly, to me, is just tired ass tech. Bottom line, I mean, shit was invented in the 70s. There is so much more that can be done with that premise. There was even, there's a Vice video of some little dude. I think he now goes around the world doing drugs. Basically, he goes and interviews somebody about something and then does the drug and records his experiences. But he went over to Amsterdam to interview Wim Hof. And he was, and I've shared this story probably on a Facebook Live, but it's just so, to me, it highlights the utter naivety of this contemporary movement right now, who are getting into this stuff really late. They're like, all right, we're going over to this chat about this Wim Hof fella, and we're really skeptical and cynical, and we're gonna have, you're just gonna have to show us that there's a real there. And then Wim has them hyperventilate for 10 minutes. And he's like, oh my God, I feel all tingly. What are you doing? What kind of madman are you? And he's like, dude, what is happening is not magical. It's not mystical. You are blowing off carbon dioxide in your bloodstream, and you are creating an alkaline blood pH. And that has a byproduct of tingling and even something called tetany, which is actually literally where your hands kind of claw up and you kind of lose involuntary control. Interesting, right? And has other potential impacts when you stack things, but in and of itself, it is a physiological byproduct of making your blood, blowing off CO2 and making your blood alkaline. So that's interesting to note, and taken to its extreme, you can do two things with it. You can basically use it as preparation, because for anybody that's not already clued into this, and we'll talk about this in a couple of images, but fundamentally the urge to breathe is not from a lack of oxygen, it's from a buildup of carbon dioxide. So by hyperventilating ahead of trying to hold your breath, whether it's just for fun or whether it's for some specific land-based target, or quite often, most commonly with freedivers who are trying to just hold their breath and see how deep down to the ocean they can go, by blowing off carbon dioxide, you artificially repress your desire or urge to breathe, so you can hold your breath longer. Now, that is riddled with cautions and caveats, to the point where, for instance, Laird Hamilton, who's a big wave surfer, would not do that because he couldn't risk shallow water blackout. He couldn't risk going down and being able to stay down there, but running out of oxygen and then passing out underwater. So they actually train in a very different way than what sort of more quiet, calm freedivers were trained. But all that to be said, it has two predominant functions, which is done briefly, aka 5 minutes or less. It blows off CO2 and represses your urge to breathe, or your respiratory drive. Done for a long ass time, like an hour to 3 hours, it can induce, mild to completely powerful state shifts, aka holotropic breathwork. So fundamentally, and again, giant honking caveats. We're playing with respiration here. So number one, don't do stupid shit. Number two, remember it's respiration, and we can, and you can game over this thing if you get that wrong. Number three, don't do anything against advisement and without consultation of your attending physician, et cetera, et cetera. But if you want to engage in hyperventilation and see what the limits are, breathe as fast as possible, as deep as possible, for as long as possible, with great tunes on a headset. See what happens. right? And always be lying down for any of your interesting breathing practices. That's another super important one. Okay, but just try it. It doesn't require any more hype, and people will run you through a rigmarole. And basically, if you're not getting enough sensation or novel experience, breathe faster and harder and deeper. If you're getting too much, slow it down. So you're in complete control of that, but that's a very easy one to test and experiment with. The only thing that probably is in the way is just being self-conscious or bored and not going hard enough, which is why a workshop can be, can be a useful thing. Now, the next one is the idea of saying, most of us think about breathing most of the time is just in and out, more or less 50-50. However, there is a sort of vagal nerve hack, which is pretty useful, which is that if you actually exhale twice as long as you're inhaling, and I mean, we deliberately have kept our ratios super simple. And if some of you are like banging away on the chat bar and that kind of stuff, being like, well, what about this? And what about a 3-2-1? What about a 5-4-3? And you're like, yep, maybe. We actually work with Dr. Andrew Huberman at Stanford, who did all the research on Wim Hof. I've shared that story a little bit with some of you guys before. And they are experimenting with some super complex, different breathing patterns, like with different hold cycles and different inhales and different exhales. And it gets fairly baroque in a hurry. It gets complicated. And I am underconvinced at this point. I'll give you guys updates as soon as we hear updates from him. I'm underconvinced that they are worth the time and the hassle, honestly. I think the fundamentals are the fundamentals, and that's what we're teaching here. And everything else becomes angels on the head of a pin. So it sort of becomes biohacking's equivalent of scholasticism. But that said, when you exhale noticeably more slowly than you inhale, right? Forget exact. You are signaling to your nervous system and to your kind of evolutionary little monkey, things are cool. In fact, things are so cool that my body is going to be powering down, my heart rate is going to drop, my stress and vigilance signals are going to drop, and I'm actually going to feel better. Now, this is both hyperventilation and the 2-1 exhales kind of go together, and that makes up a free diving prep protocol. That is how most free divers will do it. They will do the 2-1 first, to drop their heart rate as low as they can. They will then hyperventilate at the end for 2 to 3 minutes to blow off carbon dioxide. And then they'll take their big breaths, they'll kind of swallow a few extras called lung packing, and then they'll go on their dive. So what you're seeing here is the slow one. The first one is fairly straightforward. Humans just should do it more often. The next two kind of live together as the free dive breath prep protocol. Okay. So now let's get to the next couple. To get a little fancier, box breathing, which is something we train in flow fundamentals, is just the idea of even inhales, holds, exhales, and holds. That's what makes the box. And you can increase that from 5 seconds to 10 seconds to 15 seconds. And one of the things that will do is it will allow you to increase your CO2 tolerance, because the hardest part of that box is actually having empty your lungs and hold it there. And how long can you hold that without a irresistible urge to breathe? Okay. And then I'm going to just discuss the next two, and then we're going to give you guys a quick kind of quiz, a quick body quiz. So the next one is what we would just generically call pressure breathing. And think about this. This makes basic sense, and we all do it. So if you've ever seen old grandpas shuffling around with their oxygen canisters, right? Because they smoke cigarettes all the time. So chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, in the medical tradition, in the medical world, they're often called pink puffers because their skin is pink, and they're often going, hey, sonny, right? And they are instinctively doing something. They are creating back pressure with their lips to increase the pressure in their lungs, to increase the gas exchange across their alveoli, which are those little nooks and crannies in our lungs that create all the surface area for our lungs to really work well. Mountaineers will do the same thing in high altitude environments. So if you're above, depending on how well you're acclimatized, if you're above 15,000 feet, and all the way up to 30,000 feet, in that space, you will find yourself pressure breathing. And sometimes even pressure breathing multiple breaths in between steps. It can get that hairy. So the idea that, and for anybody that's familiar with yoga, and you have experienced what is known as ujjayi breathing, where you're actually closing off your glottis, you're basically sort of tightening the garden hose and creating additional pressure through your windpipe and through your breathing system, that is another slightly more exotic form of pressure breathing. But they are all forms of pressure breathing, and that is, and even if you've seen the Olympics and you've seen sprinters or weightlifters blowing out their cheeks for peak exertion, right? That is another example of pressure breathing. So again, not all of these are like sexy, and not all of these have workshops at Esalen or in Bali, but they are part of this human experience of ours of breathing and learning to do the right kind of breathing at the right time for our body's physiology and our objectives. And that's what we want you guys thinking of. And then the final one was the nasal breathing with vibration if you feel like getting freaky. So nose breathing in general, as I said, tends to, again, down-regulate our stress responses, tends to keep us in a more resilient physiological state. And if you do any form of humming or vibration of the nasal cavity, you actually massively boost the nitric oxide that, if you guys remember, was the neurotransmitter that puts us into, or certainly allows us to slide into the relaxation phase of a flow cycle, and also allows vasodilation and the carrying of oxygen around our bodies all the more. Cool? So that's that. Those are the kind of, are there others? Can you thin slice some of these into different categories? Hell yes. But hopefully these 6 boxes kind of give you guys just a sense from slow to hyper to asymmetrical with the 2-to-1 to symmetrical with the box to pressure breathing, right? Changing the nozzle, as it were, to increase gas exchange, to how we breathe, mouth or nose. Those are at least some good places to get started. Now, I'm going to take a quick kind of timeout and just share with you guys some more dorky tools. So if you're interested in the nasal breathing, if you're like, that sounds kind of interesting, and that sort of seems like that's kind of one of the sneaky ways into all of this stuff, you're right. And in fact, working with Dr. Huberman's partner, who interestingly trained both with Laird Hamilton and now Huberman, those guys are basically advocating nasal breathing for all elite athlete training. And so push yourself as hard as you can without going to mouth breathing. And if you need to go to mouth breathing, do it only enough to catch your kind of breath and then go back to nasal breathing. And then that builds up a capacity and a tolerance that can then be converted into, and we'll see, again, research is, TBD on all this, but, at least anecdotally, meaning they've worked with some, athletes for the last several years and they have had, remarkable results. That's a very powerful way to increase capacity, which is, train aerobically and anaerobically with nasal stuff. Now, here is the thing that would make sense is if you're going to be doing that kind of work without your mouth involved, you're going to need your nose really working well. So step 1 would be highly recommended, and this is true and by the way, we are not repping any of these products. These are products that we have simply sourced, believe in. We should, but we haven't. So this is all just us sharing cool shit with you guys. So first one here is what does it say on it? NeoMed. So NeoMed sinus rinse. You guys may have heard neti pots. We actually distributed these as part of our gear bags for Flow Camp in the summer. If anybody ever goes to Burning Man, you absolutely have to take one of these. But this is basically like a turbocharged neti pot. So neti pots are the old Vedic, looks like a little Aladdin genie lamp, and you turn your nose sideways and you pour it through one nostril. Total pain in the ass, and if you're really gunged up, they don't work. These sons of bitches, you just jam them up there, and you can put eucalyptus and various other things. There's the baking soda packets, etc., and you crank it, and it just pressure washes your entire nasal cavity. So super awesome, and then creates a really clear and open opportunity to breathe. Now the next one is these guys. These guys are, and I've just tried these. These are nasal turbines, which basically are the sort of next step up from those little strips that if you ever were like a triathlete geek, you might have seen like a few years ago that they almost look like butterfly bandage and everybody was wearing them. These nasal turbines are the next level of those. And you literally, let's see, how does this go? Godly. I'm so spatially challenged, this is ridiculous. You put them up your nose and they hold your nose open. is fundamentally what this amounts to. So you basically, it flares your nostrils. It's almost the reverse of like a synchronized swimmer's clip. It actually goes in your nose and expands your nostrils. So if you wanted to be super geeky, not necessarily recommending it, but you can, it would be, do the nasal flush, then insert these, take some of these, right, with the nitric oxide lozenges, and then engage in your respiratory or breathing practices. So with that, let's actually do our step one. We're just going to do what is called static apnea, and we're just going to, well, in fact, I'll tell you what, I'll do it this way. We'll do CO2 tolerance first, and then we'll do static apnea. So if you guys are ready for an exercise, right, give me a shout. We'd like you all to sit up straight, be relaxed in your chair, and this one's super simple. We are simply going to test what your CO2 tolerance is like right now. And what we'd like you guys to do is like log them. We're going to put down a poll, and you can plug in your number. But if you're interested in going further after this workshop, these can serve as your initial baselines. So you can check them out. So the first things first is we're just going to do CO2 tolerance, and we just do this by taking 3 easy breaths. So just go ahead and take 3 easy breaths as I'm talking. So just relax. Take 3 easy breaths, and then inhale as fully as you can. And your goal, imagine you just got a tiny pinprick you're exhaling through. You're trying to exhale as slowly as possible, okay, for as long as possible. Okay, so that's the goal. You're exhaling as slowly as possible for as long as possible. Okay, now there will be 2 things that will force you to breathe, one of 2. One is you're out of air, so that's your VO2 max, or you literally have a buildup of CO2 and you can't help but want to inhale. Okay, so if everybody's ready, we are going to get ready. I am going to reset this. I'm going to say, take your exhale, inhale, and begin. Just like a little pinprick letting out of a balloon. I'm just going to call out time. Take it as slowly as you possibly can. 10 seconds. And interestingly, I just did this test, the first time I ever did this test, and we were sitting at a table with a bunch of people in a corporate environment, 20 seconds. And I did like 1:05. And then I was with the commander of SEAL Team 6, and I looked over and I'm like, hey, Daddy, what'd you get? 30 seconds? And he said 1:30. I'm like, son of a bitch. So I ended up instantly having to go back and redo it. And let me tell you, 1:30 feels like pain. 40 seconds. 45. So if anybody's still holding on, you're doing great. 50. I'll let it ride all the way to 1 minute. We're not there yet. Not there yet. 1 minute. Who's still going? 1:30. That's SEAL Team 6 commander. Bam. See if you can do it. 1:10. Now you can really feel the balance between volumes in your lungs versus urge to breathe. So you've got absolute air in your lungs. 15. 20. Anybody still hanging on, grabbing the table? Bang, 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 bang. 25. 4, 3, 2, 1. And 1:30. Well done, everybody. So let's check on the polls. How did you guys do? Let's see what we've got. CO2 tolerance. How long was your breath hold? A whole bunch of people in the 30 to 60 range. That's great, guys. So half of you guys, some folks, 20%, 1 in 5 in the 0 to 30. I bet if you just retook it right now, knowing what to do and how to do it, you'd massively tap that. We got some folks in the, holy smokes, we have folks in the 90 plus second range. That is impressive. That is really good. That is awesome, guys. So really, that's phenomenal. So super impressed to see that, especially out of the gates, like with very little instruction. So what we're going to do now is, let's see, where are we? Oh, we'll keep it here for a second. Let's do the static apnea test as well. And that's just a fancy term for holding your breath. So we're going to do the same basic drill. And again, if you have, not that you necessarily, we didn't sort of give you guys assignments to come to this course with, but if you have a pulse oximeter, this is a cool time to put those on and see how basically what your intersection between heart rate and oxygen saturation go. Now, pro tip, you want to be very mindful medically. You get put on oxygen in a hospital if you're much below 93%, 92% oxygen saturation. That's very much in the safe than sorry category. You can, and this is not medical advice, but I mean, just recently as an hour ago, I had mine down to 75% just doing breath hold stuff. So pay attention, know your own limits, know your own pulmonary and cardiac conditions, et cetera, but there's wide range in how much oxygen saturation can have. So that's it. Now we're going to do just static apnea, and this is just free breath hold. So just take 3 easy breaths. We're going to start this again. So exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, and this is going to be our last one. Exhale fully, like really ring it out. And inhale, lock it off, and hold your breath. And just relax every muscle in your body. Relax, relax, relax. And for me, at least, this is way more fun than meditating. You know, call me old-fashioned or spastic ADD boy. Basically, I find breath hold, and especially in water and other environments, way more interesting than trying to think about not thinking. So if anybody is looking for a slightly more embodied 30 seconds, slightly more embodied excuse for mindful awareness, respiratory training is a really, really good one. 40 seconds. Let's see how everybody's doing. I also used to do this. I went to a very strict Catholic school for high school, and the brothers used to literally teach still in black cassocks, and there was a grouchy old one who was awesome, but grouchy. And I used to try and make it through calculus class my senior year by trying to hold my breath as long as I could. I didn't realize this is like a long-standing life experience of mine. 60 seconds. So 1 minute, everybody. If you can make it that far, let's see how we're doing. We won't go as long as some of you, I'm sure, can hold, but let's at least go to that minute and a half range as well. And if you tap that out comfortably, more power to you. We are at minute 20. Minute 30. All right. Great job, everybody. So now let's go back to our polls. Go ahead and check in on how did you do. So a whole bunch of people in the 30 to 60 range. Some people in the 60 to 90. Wow, here we go. Here's the 90 plusers. They were probably still holding their breath. That's why they were late to the poll. Oh, check it out. A third of you guys. No, even more. This is out of hand. Okay, so this is like watching election polling. Half of you guys holding it past 90 seconds. So we got a bunch of ringers in here. That's fantastic. So that's great. That is great. This is really really fun to see such a bunch of ballers in this space. So now we're going to add in a couple of additional hacks actually, which is the mammalian dive reflex. And for people that have done free diving training before, you're probably familiar with this. This is where they do static apnea. How long can you hold your breath face down in a pool? The reason they do it face down in a pool, I mean, one is so there's no cheating, but the other is because if it's cool enough, below 60, below certainly, and again, it gets more impactful the colder it is, but if it's below 60 to 70, it actually triggers the mammalian dive reflex, which is just something that people learned a long time ago, which is that mammals, surprise, surprise, when immersed in cold water, can survive for seemingly impossibly long periods of time, well after what they could have held their breath on land. And what they realized is, wouldn't you know it, that cold, it's not even wetness, and this is the big breakthrough, not even wetness, but coldness to the face actually stimulates the vagus nerve, actually signals the body to be like, oh shit, you might be underwater or in a spot of trouble. So go into semi-hibernation mode, shunt blood from your extremities. So basically anywhere like my fingers don't need oxygen the same way my heart and my brain do. So it's basically saying get all of the oxygen-rich blood to my core where I need it. That's going to increase my blood pressure slightly, right? It's also going to also drop my heart rate, right? And put me into this semi-meditative state. So now we get to some fairly interesting things because now this is where my kids were just taking the piss out of me. This is the Luca Libre cold mask. You can put these bad boys on and strap them on your face, which starts looking very spooky. But you can put these on and trigger the mammalian dive reflex. So don't forget your nose turbines, right? And your pulse oximeter. You can be like super geek about all this stuff if you want to. You just need to pick who gets to come in and see you doing this stuff, right? So now let's put it all together. So this is kind of what is really where things get interesting, right? So everything we just talked about has been building basic physiology overview, your own assessments, how do I do in CO2 tolerance and ability and static apnea. But now we want to put this into motion. So if you see that basically the sort of teal line and the yellow line basically intersect, and that is, I start with 20%, no, 30%. Is that right? No, 20%. 20% oxygen in my bloodstream. So let's say I'm at oxygen saturation, right? And basically, the longer I hold my breath, the more that gets consumed by my body, and it decreases over time. And at the same time, I start out with very low CO2 in my bloodstream, and it tends to build up over time, right? And basically, when it builds up too much, I end up having to breathe. And that is, if you look at it, right, the IBM little motion here in the middle is an involuntary breath movement. That's the experience that we've all had trying to hold our breath as kids, and maybe even just now, right? And what happened, and that's too much CO2. The alternate is, well, what happens when I don't have enough oxygen? Well, you don't have enough oxygen, you just pass out. And the pass out is to restore ourselves to parasympathetic breathing, and right, we're hardwired to do that. Okay, so what is interesting is how can we extend that period? Because as I said, this is effectively a form of highly embodied mindfulness training. And we now know that hyperventilation does certain things. We now know that 2-to-1 breathing does certain things. We know that pressure breathing does certain things. We know that box breathing does certain things. What happens when we put all that knowledge together? And you can put it together in fundamentally interesting ways. Now, if you don't want to just go hyperventilate, go hyperventilate. But what you can do is you can also combine these techniques into something really fun. And so what that can look like is, let's just see how we would do this. If you take a look at the blue arc, you can say, okay, now how can we simultaneously decrease our CO2 as much as possible and supersaturate our oxygen as much as possible, such that we spend as long as possible not having to breathe? That would be like the fun kind of high school kitchen experiment. And the simple answer is we already know. You can, and I have mixed feelings about this stuff, by the way. This is what you can get off Amazon. This is Boost Sports Oxygen. I have been testing it and trying to validate it with one of these bad boys, and I am not seeing compelling results. That doesn't mean you guys won't. I'm going to go back and continue checking this. But what we have had, we have a functional medicine doctor on staff who has actually been working with, hospital grade, medical grade, oxygen, nitrogen, nitrous oxide, various other things with proper professional blends, proper patient intakes, all of those kind of things. So we've been doing this on a more studied and kind of formal professional level. But you can certainly, at least in theory, what happens if I can consume, basically if I can hyperventilate, drop my CO2 levels drastically, super oxygenate, and then go into a breath hold. And what does that, and then by the way, trigger my vagus nerve, right, with one of these bad boys and see what difference, and supersaturate with nitric oxide. What happens as you play with all of those parameters? And do you get meaningful differences from different combinations, or even kitchen sinking it into one entire uninterrupted experience? My personal experiences have varied. I mean, I've got initial data sets that the oxygen, the hyperventilation, the cold mask, and the nitric oxide lozenges do make a difference. And I've gone from without trying, without any very low key, because I wanted to keep repeating it. So I was not going balls to the wall. But I mean, very easily went from 3 minutes without any strain, because I had to kind of create a level, not just like what could I white knuckle once, but like what was my easiest. So I was like waited till I had one involuntary breath movement and then just exhale. So I went from 3 minutes to 4.5 minutes with no perceived difference in strain. And that's significant, and have gone past that in more substantial means. So here's an invitation. if you guys are fired up and you'd like to do a little of these trainings, check what is the intersection between nitric oxide concentrations in your bloodstream, oxygen supplementation, carbon dioxide blow off, which you will experience as numbness and tingling, so you can kind of feel it, and then go with a long breath hold. Now, if you really want to get interesting, and this is not recommended outside the oversight of a functional medicine doctor, you can substitute that nitrogen. So we just talked about CO2 and oxygen and how to tweak those and extend your arc. And if you want to get really interesting, you can both optimize nitric oxide and swap out the nitrogen for nitrous oxide with the oversight of a first-aid physician and with oxygen on board. Do not do the hippie whippet thing. That's hypoxia, meaning that you are taking in nothing but a gas that your body doesn't metabolize, and part of why people in parking lots at concerts and that kind of things pass out, etc. It's hypoxia. Don't go down that road. Don't go down the hypoxic road in general. And I shared this, I think, in our newsletter just announcing this, but there's been a recent study on freedivers, and the ones who can hold their breath the longest, like the 7.5 minute plus freedivers, are testing as cognitively impaired on modified Stroop tests. And the Stroop tests are just those, like where they say a color in the wrong, they like will say green, but it'll be actually colored brown, and you have to figure out which ones don't match, right? Tests like that, the best freedivers in the world are testing as impaired. So hypoxia is not a good thing. So be very mindful. Now, the interesting thing is you look to this middle part of the chart, right? Non-ordinary states of consciousness. You can get there and you can create very interesting things. And we said this was a 5-pointed star. We said respiration, movement, music, sexuality, and sacraments, right? So you start combining those with this protocol and you can end up in some very interesting places. So at a minimum, consider a mindful practice with breath holds and different modulations of your nervous system in conjunction, and we'll just keep this basic for an introductory workshop, with good tunes, and put those tunes on. And if you want to get any fancier, we can talk about it as we get into more personal and more involved trainings. So with that, we have actually covered our time. You guys have been awesome. So the good news about all of this stuff, the kind of thing would be like, well, why do I give a shit? Or why do I care about holding my breath? Or what is even the point? Well, back to the beginning of those 4 do's, right? The idea is that this is meaningfully impactful on our emotional states, on our physiology, on our health, on our performance, on our reactivity, and even on our transcendence and our ability to stay connected to non-ordinary states that we may find interesting or valuable. So in that respect, that's kind of interesting. And what's also kind of interesting is that this stuff is trainable and hackable. And it serves as one of the bedrocks. This is one of our kind of initial renditions of here's all the ways you can change, here's how you can level up to be a superhuman, and you can play in all of these realms. And what we were talking about tonight is fundamentally that respiratory range. And how can you harness respiration as a very powerful state shifting and self-developing tool? So the really interesting thing is that this entire right-hand side of all of these categories, when you stack them up, is when you kind of get cherries on the jackpot. And you tend to get profoundly interesting experiences when you combine the right-hand half of all of these, the brain, the heart, posture, respiration, psychology, all these things. And then we get to the very interesting places, and we do it exactly backwards than it has been done in all of human history, which was either religious and mythological or psychological and emotional. So the idea of being able to do it neurobiologically is relatively new. Not that the techniques haven't had their places in other traditions. They have, 100%. But the ability to do this without deferring to gurus, without succumbing to magical thinking, without having to give up some of our agency and common sense, that is pretty new and pretty cool and pretty fun. So that's very much what we are about. That is what we're here to do. As it happens, we are kicking off, and part of the reason we've been doing more frequent sort of webinars or trainings like this is to just connect with folks, say, hey, this is who we are, this is how we roll, this is our take on stuff. If this lands for you, here's an invitation. And many of you are already veterans of Flow Fundamentals. If so, awesome. And even some of our more advanced classes and our live trainings. Fantastic. Great to see you guys here, and thank you. And if you're not, then you get to choose if you're interested in, like, does this feel good? Does this seem different? Is this of merit in my hunt for the things I value? And if you're coming from the biohacking space, if you're coming kind of from the Wim Hof space, you can certainly see, hopefully, that we both speak that language, but we don't succumb to a particularism. We are sort of synthesizers, I think is the simplest way to describe it, and very much practice-based. This is kind of the way we like to get to the places that matter most. And to put that simply, which is, we don't give a shit about any of this stuff if it doesn't work. And if it does work, then all of it's irrelevant. So that is the kind of blasphemous thing to say, but it's true, which is that the people who geek out about these states are usually the ones who are at least capable of getting them. And the ones who are really capable at getting them tend not to geek out about them. So if that sounds like you, if that's of interest, feel free to check out the registration for Flow Fundamentals. It kicks off. We've just done an amazing reshoot of all of our content. We have a beta class that's marching through it right now. We are super duper excited to be sharing this with more and more people. It is not actually what you guys got today is actually, as I said, the stuff that's going to be coming out in my next book. What Flow Fundamentals is actually a comprehensive introduction to all the tools, skills, practices, and models you need in order to have someplace to put this. Because the question is not, does this stuff work? Promise. This stuff works. And the reality is that once you get over that initial skepticism, the question is like, holy shit, where's the steering wheel and the brakes? So having practice-based practices, having a community, having accountability, having data, these things are essential. And from time to time, we have let people skip the line, like, oh, I'm such and such and so, and I don't want to do the beginning class. I'm like, okay, cool, come on, take one of our advanced classes. And they're usually like, their brains are melting 3 weeks in to the more advanced content, and they're missing the foundations and the fundamentals. So that's it. That's what we are here to do. That's what we're about, is helping more good people wake up, grow up, and show up. And in a way that doesn't require buying into anybody else's fish story or sacrificing our own agency or common sense. So that's the jam, guys. We are now, I think, into questions. So I get to actually, oh, and by the way, the shit works. So pre-post, 112% increase in absorption in task, 85% increase in intrinsic drive and motivation, and 88% something or other, which was supposed to be increase in absorption in the present moment. So like, we don't want to take our own word for it. The same way I said we're checking with our pulse oximeters, any of these breathing protocols to see if they really do what they say they're supposed to. We do that end to end with our stuff. And if that seems like your jam, feel free to join. We are stoked to have you. And in the meantime, we are now, let's see, how can I do this? I just found another forward button for my PowerPoint. So I could have been in the chat bar this whole time. I'm learning. Okay, so let's hear any questions you guys have. That was a shit pile of information, so I thank you guys for hanging on. And we've still got a lot of you guys here with us. So let's just turn it over and take, say, 5 minutes, maybe 10 if we're really cooking, on what is possible. And I will try and stop the slide presentation. Go. There we go. Wow. All right, fantastic. So let's hear from you guys, questions. So where will we open the first Flow Gym? That's Tom. We are actually in conversations right now in Vancouver. So that's a big project. We are going through a slow process in Whistler, but it's encouraging. We will quite likely be partnering with the Olympic Athlete Training Center up in Whistler. So super exciting, and some of Canada's top neuroscientists. So that's cool. And we are also waiting to hear back. Like literally, I was on the phone on Friday with all parties involved on our flow camp, which would be in Utah this summer. And if it's not in Utah, and we're going to make the decision in the next probably week, it's going to be in Costa Rica and Nosara. So it'll be surfing, stand-up paddling, and for anybody that's interested, ethical access to quote-unquote medicine journeys. So, which we will not be facilitating, but we will potentially be coordinating with outfits down there. Plenio, how much will breathing be part of Flow in Mexico workshop? That is actually not, that is a different thing entirely. That is not from FGP. So that is something that Stephen was invited to join and attend, but it's a different bag. Philip was just saying, a ton of info. Will this be accessible after? Also, can I have access to the DNA test, even though I've taken the Flow Fundamentals course? For anybody that was interested, this was it. I have just taken mine. That was it. It's pretty cool. It's swab tests and all that kind of. In fact, oh my gosh. Okay, I was missing the thing I had to register, and I think I just found it. So you can. They do have an actual hard cost to them, but you can reach out to Lucas. We're happy to kind of work that out and get you a setup as soon as you can. Osvaldo, you want to do Osvaldo was interested in the DNA test. How about this? Just Lucas at Flow Genome Project for any alums of Flow Fundamentals, and let's just try and hook you guys up with that, and we'll just kind of give you guys wholesale pricing on that, and just pass it through because you've already come and been fun and hanging out with us in training. So let's definitely connect you to that. Zach was saying, can you recommend any apps for Apple Watch that can help make hacking Flow a little easier? It's tricky. I would say if you're going to do anything, and certainly that's something that's why we feature as part of the bundle for Flow Fundamentals is heart rate variability. If I had to pick one thing to have most folks do to start, it would be heart rate variability. We have, part of our kind of long ongoing roadmap is to actually create the iFlow app, which is just, we're waiting for all the tech to catch up and be at a credible enough place where we could do, like when I showed you guys that matrix, that we could actually include EEG, HRV, potentially cortisol, or some other kind of real-time saliva diagnostic, some of those tools, and actually help steer people into it in real time. That doesn't exist yet. We are in conversations actually starting next week with some top tech folks in Silicon Valley about putting that on the ground, but it won't be ready, I'm guessing, for more than a year. Okay, Andres was saying, you mentioned a nitric oxide booster supplement. How is it different from those supplements used to work out? Probably not really. You either get them in big cans from GNC and it's to make you swole, or you get them in little lozenges from a medical lab, and it's for other reasoning. My assumption is that the basic interactions are going to be comparable. I just prefer something that's a little cleaner and doesn't involve all that kind of whey and false sugars and that kind of stuff. But my hunch is that there's fundamentally, let's just see. This is the Neo 40. It's high in vitamin C, high in B12, high in folates, and then it says proprietary nitric oxide blend, but it says beet powder, hawthorn berry, citrulline, sodium nitrite. So I would say those are pretty conventional standards. It's just how you want to take it. Tim, going to have another winter snowboarding flow camp? Yes, we are, but unfortunately it was British Columbia or nothing this season for a good snowpack. So we actually had to postpone our Utah one because of the lousy snow, although it's finally showing up. Kevin saying, anything we, the community, can do to serve you, Stephen, and the FGP team mission? That's a super fun one. Thank you. Yes, hell yes. Well, I think the simplest is check these protocols. That's where I am. I want to see to what extent does nitric oxide supplementation, does oxygen supplementation, does hyperventilation play on, and even nasal breathing. Do any of these things work for you? And we've got at least two tools, well, three tools. We've got nitric oxide test strips, so you can do some kind of validation. And because they're kind of expensive, I double dip. Like I'll test it once, and then I'll do the thing that I hope is boosting nitric oxide, and then I'll put more spit on it. It's not super precise, but at least I'm not like blowing through test strips. So we'd love to do that. The pulse oximeter, which is giving us oxygen saturation and heart rate, and our stopwatches, right? So we have at least the ability, and then our subjective interior experience. So if you guys start taking notes and just checking, hey, this worked for me, this worked better, this didn't work at all. That's the kind of stuff that I'm just super interested in at this level, including vagus nerve interaction. Brad was just asking, thoughts on exhalation through pursed lips instead of through nose to create more resistance during aerobic training? Well, the short answer is yes, that's why we all do it. The longer answer is, now that we know that nose breathing, and of course now that we know, I mean, yogis have been talking about nasal breathing and even different nostril breathing and things for a long time. But now that we are, at least in the performance sports space, are aware of potential benefits of nasal breathing, try both. And do it under standard conditions. So if you're road running, if you're stand-up paddling over a certain distance, if whatever it is you do, and you can isolate the variables, test it. See how you run and see what your heart rate, see what your data looks like versus pursed breathing versus nasal breathing only, and let's check this and see what happens. Theopneus, there's some amazingly interesting names tonight. You guys are awesome. Have you looked at all into the positive benefits of CO2 for driving O2 into the blood, a la bronchial breathing? No, I haven't, but if you would put a link, we would love to check it out. And so the question for me in that question is, how are you modulating CO2? And then what's happening? And clearly you don't want to get rid of CO2 in your bloodstream. It's playing a role. We all do it for good reasons. Okay, great. So that's the normalbreathing.com. Fantastic. Tyler was just asking roughly how many hours a week for the 6-week course. Fundamentally, it boils down to a power hour, of which you're probably already doing 30 to 45 minutes. So you're maybe adding another 15 to 20 minutes of new activities a day. You're just doing everything else deliberately and intentionally. And then there's about a 20-minute TED Talk kicks off every week, and then sort of 3 to 5 minute kind of little power-ups through the day. So these are all on your phone and you can check them out. So I would say probably about 60 to 90 minutes a day. Gets you through the 6 weeks. And we've been blown away by the impact that as little as that has had. So that's the 78% increase in flow states for thousands of people that have taken it. So that's kind of cool compared to all the big guns that we do have, and we actually love to play with when we're in person with folks. Yep, Michael was just saying that. So let's just check anything out. Andre saying thanks. Okay, Mike is saying, what are your thoughts on incorporating THC edibles, low dose, while employing all these techniques? Well, if we went back to, in Stealing Fire, the book that we came out with last year, we talked about the big 6 neurochemicals. One of them was anandamide. And obviously, it's an endocannabinoid. So exogenously, if you choose to ingest something that contains cannabinoids and activates the anandamide receptors, aka edibles, you're going to have some more of that in your system. Interestingly, nitric oxide, there was a recent study at MIT, and they were basically like, this is a completely novel signaling molecule. Nitrous oxide triggers dopamine, norepinephrine, and endorphins, which also happen to be 3 of the others. So we've got those 3 plus anandamide. You're now 4/6 of the way there. And it also puts you into a delta wave deep sleep. They're actually exploring revisiting nitrous oxide as a more intensive anesthetic for that very reason. So now if you've got 4 of the 6 big 6 neurochemicals in your system, and you're shifting out of beta wave brain activity and into delta, which is effectively a kind of dreamless state, while conscious in a semi-lucid breath hold, you're into some very interesting places and spaces. So you are not wrong in thinking of stacking or combining things. And you can do that with technology. Do I put on a headset? Do I put on something that shifts my state? Pharmacology, something like edibles or something like the nitric oxide lozenges. Psychology, what am I thinking? What am I imagining? What am I doing? What's my relationship to these practices? And what was the final one? Neurobiology, right? Am I hacking my vagus nerve? Am I tuning my respiratory thing? So when you combine all 4 of those, you tend to get powerful impacts with more fun, less time, less impact. I mean, less repercussions, I think is the simplest way to say it. All right, 1 or 2 more. You guys are awesome, and there's so many good ones. Let's just see. Brad, nasal cavity, thoughts on exhalations. Okay. Neo40 comes in beetroot powder. Yep. Does the course include any TDS? So this will be the last one, and I'll just come back to Kevin's as well because that was such a good question. Does the course include TDCS, any TDCS tips? No, it doesn't, and here's why. We worked with Dr. Mike Wiesen, who was the DARPA recipient of a multi-million-dollar grant to create the optimal electrodes for TDCS, et cetera, et cetera. He's the one that did the studies that we've referenced in our books. And it's specifically around like target and sniper acquisition Air Force pilots and radar operators looking over, poring over target recognition and all these kinds of things. And we actually got to put on the Medusa skull caps and do his thing. And his thing is super robust, which is they have a 3D holographic map of the brain. They compare experts to novices. They figure out what parts of the expert's brain are lighting up and the novices aren't. And they target in the novice just those areas that the expert's brain fires that mine didn't. And so super precise, not like YouTube geeks with like 9-volt batteries, oh, I can't see today, dude, like that kind of thing. So incredibly targeted, very thorough, meticulous, and did it to me, put me in the supposed flow state that the woman who, if you've ever seen the Radiolab article, episode on TDCS, where she's like, I felt like I was driving Super Mario Kart on the way home, and I was like, woo, woo, woo. And they all acknowledged that she was this wild ass outlier / journalist writing a good story. I was underwhelmed. And the combination of that's the smartest top flight folks on the planet doing it, that they have a very precise method of doing it, that they are highly skeptical of amateur efforts. You can't just put shit places and it work out. And that generally whatever you upregulate, you're downregulating something else. So you're getting a temporary bump in something and you're getting a drop in other stuff. And then even throw in like Halo, which is currently one of the more trendy ones. And they've got great marketing and I don't have anything against them. But I mean, again, talking with one of the top neuroscientists in Canada, he's like, it's like basically like taking a low voltage shower over your skull, because none of this stuff is going to get through with any degree of precision through thick bone. And so again, targeting specific zones and regions doesn't work. Now, what does work, and it has the most powerful result and will be available in 6 months to the open market, but with a prescription, is what is called the PONS device. And that goes on your tongue and has access to 4 of the 12 cranial nerves. So it goes up through the brain stem inside. So it's inside out, not outside in. And it is much more targeted in what it affects and how. So moral of the story is we don't just train with stuff to train with it, because it's sort of blinky and shiny. We find that often confuses people and ends up with disappointment and frustration and cynicism. And we don't want to be a part of that game. At our expense. Quite honestly, because there are several other folks in the biohacking community that are making tremendous companies out of flogging random shit, but that's just not our jam. Our jam is in actually raising good people to go do good things, and a realization that there's fundamentally nothing new under the sun. We have some interesting insights from neuroscience. We have some cool developments in psychology, but fundamentally, this process of being human is the same as it ever was. And let's just help folks get enough of their act together to remember that, and then connect with each other, and then go and have fun and do cool shit. So with that, guys, love you and leave you. Thank you so much for hanging out. I hope this was mildly useful, if not slightly disturbing, who knows. But just know you did hear it here, so don't forget it. There's a 5-pointed star that can take you into the galaxy. Respiration, movement, music, sexuality, and sacraments. And if you learn to combine them skillfully, and you can stack them all if you'd like, it can actually basically answer every question you've ever had and set you up to do the thing you're here to do. So hopefully that leaves you guys stoked. And thank you for taking the time tonight to hang with us and share a little bit on this nerdy stuff. And if you want to go beat your CO2 tolerance test or your static apnea, hopefully you have a few more tools in your quiver to go out and be dangerous, but not too dangerous. Be well, everybody.